order to accommodate both northern and southern interests, the Compromise of 1850. It contains 5 elements. Number 1, California will be admitted as a free state. Number 2, Texas will surrender its claim to New Mexico. Number 3, both Utah and Mexico will both use popular sovereignty to determine their slavery status upon entrance into the Union. 4, the purchase and auctions of slaves will be banned in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. 5, a more rigid fugitive slave law will be adopted.
Although Clay took up a neutral position, his approved compromise made no guarantees to slavery west of Texas, and also ensured freedom in California, and was key in that the free states would keep the majority in both branches of Congress. A failed proposal was the Wilmot Proviso, which would have prohibited slavery in new territories acquired from the Mexican War. A major political argument of anti-expansionists was that allowing slavery in Mexican lands would set a precedent for allowing slavery in newly acquired lands. Also, the extremely strict fugitive slave law was seen as outrageous by many Northerners, who passed several kidnapping laws to combat its effects. This also triggered Harriet Tubman's Underground Railroad to sneak fugitive slaves all the way to Canada. The major basis for this moral argument of the time relates to Wilmot Seward's higher law speech in Congress.
But there is a higher law than the Constitution, which regulates our authority over the domain and devotes it to the same noble purposes. The territory is a part, no inconsiderable part, of the common heritage of mankind, bestowed upon them by the Creator of the universe. We are his stewards, and must so discharge our trust as to secure, in the highest attainable degree, their happiness.
In summation, the Compromise of 1850 was an overall victory for the constriction of slavery to the South. The anti-expansionist moral attitude against the Compromise was beginning to slide towards abolition as opposed to restriction. Seward's higher law was influential, although seen extreme at the time, and proposed the Wilmot Proviso and passed the Compromise of 1850 and was successful in resisting the spread of slavery. Talmadge, a New York senator, proposes the Talmadge Amendment, but the federal government adopts Clay's Missouri Compromise instead.
We shall no longer admit slaves in Missouri, and all slave children will become free at the age of 25.
I, Henry Clay, propose the Missouri Compromise. Missouri will be admitted as a slave state, and Maine as a free state, in order to maintain the balance in the Senate between free and slave states. Also, no slavery shall be prohibited above the line of 3630.
Let freedom ring north of 3630. Hurrah for Clay and Missouri Compromise.
As Talmadge's amendment was rejected by the Senate, a new plan must be devised in order to please both those in favor and those opposed to the expansion of slavery. Clay's Missouri Compromise offered a border to which slavery could expand, which pleased many Northerners and many opposed to the expansion of slavery, while the inclusion of Missouri as a slave state appeased the South. To prevent further expansion of slavery, Maine was introduced as a free state to balance out the number of slave states and free states. 30 years later, the dispute arose again with the admission of Kansas and Nebraska as states. Douglas's famous policy of popular sovereignty, later defined by the Freeport Doctrine, was used in the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which became rather heated in Congress.
The senator from South Carolina has read many books of chivalry and believes himself a chivalrous knight with sentiments of honor and courage. Of course, he has chosen a mistress to whom he has made his vows, and who, though ugly to others, is always lovely to him. Though polluted in the sight of the world, and it is chaste in his sight, I mean the harlot of slavery.
Someday.
In Kansas, the bleeding was even more literal, as John Brown led a massacre of 3 slave traders at Pottawatomie Creek in Kansas. The dispute over Bleeding Kansas, involving the Sumner Brooks Affair, Pottawatomie Creek Massacre, and the general dispute over the expansion of slavery led to the Civil War. Growing over time, from the Missouri Compromise to the Kansas-Nebraska Act, the political and social tensions with regard to the expansion of slavery led to the Civil War.
The main idea of moral arguments is that people should not be property, and that is against God's will.
Moral arguments against the expansion of slavery became more important as the times progressed.
1800 to 1840s. The Second Great Awakening sparked social reforms, including abolition.
During 1831 to 1865, Garrison's The Liberator, a weekly anti-slavery newspaper, was published.
1830s through 1850s. Gag rule prohibits anti-slavery proposals. Abolitionists and anti-expansionists thought this was unfair.
During the 1840s, the Liberty Party was founded by keen advocates of abolition and was led by William Lloyd Garrison. This group saw the Constitution as an evil pro-slavery document and encouraged the political abolition of slavery.
1846 through 1848. Mexican-American War. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo followed this war, criticized as a ploy to gain more slave-worthy land. The dispute over the new lands of Texas and California led to the Compromise of 1850.
During the 1850s, Seward's higher law made a huge statement that the immortality of slavery should be contained and ended by God's higher law.
1850 Fugitive Slave Act. Northerners felt like it was kidnapping. Anthony Burns' case faced massive protests from slave sympathizers. The entire North actually began to feel more sympathetic toward fugitive slaves and also against the South's intentions in general.
In 1852, Uncle Tom's Cabin is published, and the people of Europe take an emotional stand against slavery. As a result, the North feels as if the world is on their side, and that anti-slavery opinions grow.
1856, Charles Sumner beating by Preston Brooks over the crime against Kansas gave the North the moral high ground because gentlemen fought in duels, but Brooks just started beating him with a cane. It made the public think the South were animals with no etiquette.
In 1857, The Impending Crisis of the South is written by a non-slave-holding Southerner, Hinton Helper, and it actually describes slavery as detrimental to the South as a whole.